as a norm, which I do for every discussing policy after we had a deep dive into data analysis of demographic changes, especially from the demographic transition, where we were able to look at a couple of issues that include migration, fertility, and mortality as the three major aspects of demography. And we were able to look at how we can measure those three concepts in demography. And on our last time, we were able to look at policy implication for all those three concepts and why it is key that in trying to understand how the society behaves, it is very important that we understand their demographic features because as much as they look a little very unimportant, the demographic factors actually play a very, very important role in trying to determine the health and the levels of morbidity in the community. And being public health experts, it is very important that we try to understand the demographics of our population so that we know which services they need, but also we know the trend of disease in these populations that we serve. So today, for the last bit, we want to look at an area that is very interesting, but at the same time a very challenging issue also, and that is the oh, I'm sharing with you a WhatsApp chat. Sorry, you can see this the slide.
Still the WhatsApp chat.
Oh, what of this?
Not yet shared.
Of family is impacting today demography, but also in depth how is our population health. It is very important that because this is the micro level at which individuals exist. We have all been looking at family, at population. We've been looking at fertility at a broader level, but today it is very important that we just look at what an individual is at a household level. So, what is the gist or what is driving our agenda to look at households and unions? Now, rapidly changing fertility patterns that we've detailed in the previous lecture have been accompanied by equally dramatic changes in family formation and households. Remember, in our previous lectures, we were able to look at how fertility patterns, or we looked at replacement levels, we were able to look at total fertility rate, we were able to look at how many daughters could replace the entire population at a certain time, but we were also able to look at how fertility influences uh, households and how they influence health behavior and health seeking behavior among our population. So we now want to look at the impact of fertility, the changing fertility patterns on how they impact on formation of family and households. The longer life expectancies and smaller completed family sizes brought about by the demographic transition have transformed the social and economic roles of men and women. In our earlier discussion, we realized that different societies have had different life expectancies. And also, we discussed that total fertility rate has declined. If you looked at most developed countries or regions, you realize that their total fertility rates are lower. Whereas in our countries, African countries, those that are low, middle income, but also low developing countries, we are seeing economic changes among women and men. People are spending less of their lives as parents of young children, and the meaning of marriage has changed considerably. Meaning, we were seeing younger people becoming parents today, but also we are seeing that people nowadays do not do parenthood up to a certain level. It is a very short time in which people are practicing parenthood, and then after they let the children be. So, under the conditions of high fertility and high mortality, we're talking about high birth rates and high death rates here. Women spend most of their adult lives reproducing and raising children. So, this is a typical African concept of what we're seeing today, that because our societies are having high birth rates and also high death rates, women now are positioned into producing for replacement. So because you are not sure that your child will survive, you are stuck to the position of producing these children and raising them. However, in the middle but also developed countries, where the conditions are that there is low fertility and low mortality, childbearing has become often passing or optional phase of marriage. So childbearing is barely an optional phase, in that because in your entire lifetime you're producing two children. If you produce from the age of 23, you are very aware that your child will survive up to 80s, up to 50s, up to 70s, up to 90s, and therefore it is optional, and you're not raising children, unlike our African context. So women, because there are low fertility and low mortality, and marriage or child raising is now an option, women now focus more of their life onto their working roles, and they decide to pursue lifestyle beyond our African context of domestic realm. So in this context, we're trying to compare how societies that have low birth and death rates are vying with societies that have high death rates and low and high birth rates. So, what is the changing pattern in unions and households? Increased women economic dependence and a reduced reproductive orientation have led to a transformation of marriage from necessity to a lifestyle choice. So, whereas we're seeing this more predominantly in developed countries, in our African context or in our low developing countries, we're also seeing these trends coming in, that women who attain economic independence have reduced their reproductive orientation, and therefore they would prefer to have fewer kids and pursue lifestyle other than staying in marriage. As we continue to discuss this issue, you'll realize that in that context, separations and divorce have become probably a societal norm, because a woman will therefore, because she's economically independent, will pursue marriage as a lifestyle but also as a choice. So in turn, traditional family forms are giving way to many different types of lives. Many people delay marriage to older ages, and some people never marry at all. So we are seeing in this context that even in Africa, women would prefer to delay marriage up to their 30s. What they will say, that I want to first earn money. In that regard, a woman will now therefore delay marriage up to that level. But also, we've seen that in certain societies, that women have refused to marry, or individuals have refused to marry. This may not only apply to women, but also to men. So people divorce and remarry sometimes multiple times. Single parent households are becoming more common, as are households formed by unmarried partners. So we have seen in our society today that unions have become, the divorce has become a very common aspect, but also remarrying. So you will see that here the woman divorces or the man divorces and then goes to remarry, or after some time they continuously marry. That you divorce here, have one child, go to another man, have another child, divorce, go to another one. So it is multiple times. But also we have seen away from the war-torn reason, or possibly because we were seeing single mothers or single parents as a result of war or destabilization. Single parents, because of this trend you're seeing in taking marriage as a union, have become rampant today. But also living away single parenthood, you're realizing that there are a lot of households today that are formed by unmarried partners, in that these are not legally or traditionally married children, but they are forming households. All these are patterns that are evolving today. So, what is the rationale for understanding this pattern that I've just explained? Households and the families who reside together in them are social units. So they act together to raise children, to move, and to help each other survive. That is, they act collectively to influence the processes of fertility, migration, and mortality. These are the three aspects we discussed. They also act collectively in other social and economic behaviors. While they may not be units of economic production as much as they once were, they still are units of consumption. So you see that a family and a household, they are social units. So when there is a varying pattern in how households and families are formed, it is very important that we study that kind of pattern. Why? Because we're saying that they act collectively in social and economic behaviors. So for the fact that households and families are economic consumption, it is very important that we study this kind of pattern. In addition, the recent lifestyle changes have a direct impact on fertility levels. The recent lifestyle change, we're seeing how it is affecting fertility levels. So non-traditional households often produce fewer or no children, and the delay and interruption of traditional marital unions also can result in smaller families. So you're seeing that modern households have adopted uh, different modern family planning methods. They have adopted different styles, and therefore we see a trend that if the marriage is non-traditional, we're seeing no or fewer children, and this is acceptable. However, if you reflect back to our traditional household norms, you realize that if there was a marriage that took place and there are no children, that entire family is a stigmatized family, even today in many of our traditions. And for them, they can delay children. These are now the modern households. But also, you realize that when there's a delay in traditional unions, it will result into smaller families. Unlike our traditional pattern, the pattern before, where girls never went to school or they were not entitled to go to school, and and therefore their main purpose was for reproduction, they would start producing at a tender age, and they will further produce like this, and you would have large families. However, because of the interruptions such as school, education, information, and so forth, we realize that when there is any interruption, maybe in terms of going to school or education, that can result into smaller families, because the woman will now spend more time in school, and their time for reproduction will be a little less than in a traditional marital union. So, in that aspect, we want to understand uh, all this study of marriage as a population issue is what we call nuptiality. And just to be guided, all that pattern we've been trying to study is what we call nuptiality. It refers to marriage as a population phenomenon. So it is the study of marriage as a population issue. A phenomenon is a scientific uh, realm, or and something that has scientific backing. That's what we call a phenomenon, an, or that scientific backed evidence or evidence-based study. So, including so it refers to the marriage as a population phenomenon, including the rate at which it occurs, the characteristics of people united in marriage, and the dissolution of such unions through divorce, separation, widowhood, and annulment. First marriage, okay, so it has different. There are different ways in which we can be able to study the rate at which marriage occurs, but also the characteristics of people who are united in marriage, and the dissolution of such marriages. So this entire study is what we call nuptiality, and these are the indicators we can use to understand marriage. We will need to understand the number of married and never married individuals. So, like we were saying before, in our previous lectures, when you're doing a study, what you'd call marital status is always very key. Why? Because you want to understand the pattern of marriage in your society, because you realize it has a direct impact on on services you should provide, but also on the pattern of disease. So you would be looking at the number of married and never married children of people. You want to look at marriage rates. In other words, you want to look at crude. So when you're looking at crude, remember from our earlier definitions of crude mortality rate, crude fertility rate, even when you want to study the crude marriage rate, you're looking at the number of people who are married over the total population, and you multiply it by 1,000. You'll be able to know how many married people you have in your community. But also, if you want to look at age specific, you would look at all the ages per cohort, and divide by the number of people in that particular population of that age, and you multiply by 1,000, and you will be able to get the age specific marriage rate of your population. These are indicators you can use to understand the dynamics of marriage in that population or society. So you also want to look at first marriage, mean and median age. You want to look at what is the median age at which people get married at that particular uh, population. You also want to look at what is their first age of marriage, because these are very key in trying to determine. You realize there are societies that have their age at first marriage at 16. So it literally means that by 16, majority of the women are getting married. But also, apart from marriage, you would also want to look at what is their first age, what is their age at first sex, and these are very key if you want to target services of family planning, if you want to put in services of HIV testing, counseling, and so forth. So these are indicators that can help you understand which project and policy you could come with. You also want to look at gender gaps, portions, age at marriage, widowhood. You want to look at years in marriage. How many years people understand the pattern in your community? What are the related issues? Family is normally defined via marriage in the past. However, nowadays, people live in various forms of unions. Most times, in our past, a family was marriage. When individuals got married, it meant that they are now in a family. However, today the pattern has shifted. There are issues of polygamy. There are issues of monogamy. There are issues of rate, which can be measured. You can measure your divorce or polygamy or monogamy rate through the crude method, the age specific, marriage period specific. We've also seen elites got divorces more easily. You realize that among elites, if you study the research, you realize today the pattern has shifted, that there are more divorce among educated people, or more educated people easily get divorced. It was more expected among us normal people to stay within marriage. The Protestant church allowed divorces more easily since it wasn't a sacrament. At least the fact of their refusal of the role of the Pope mattered. So for them, this is trying to show you how religion has also come in to influence marriage. Widowhood, separation, and annulment have all come in. Remarriages, marriage restrictions, illegitimacy, informal marriages, they are what they call legal bastards. So before we looked at family as marriage only, but you see today we've realized there are a lot of related issues to this marriage, and these are the issues that we've mentioned here. So today you can also see the pattern is still shifting. You see love marriage, early marriage, there is late marriage. So there are a lot of issues that have come in. The tendency in pre-modern requirement of capability to support. So we're looking at what was the tendency in pre-modern marriages. Are you able to support the woman's family? Are you able to offer the woman support? So marriage age decreased during the 20th century, particularly in the 50s and 60s. For women, the marriage age dropped from 27 to 22. In other parts of the world, the development is more linear, from low to high age. So this depiction of 27 to 22 is mostly for the most developed countries. But for us who are in the low developing countries, our development is more linear, from a low to a high age, because for us traditionally marriage was about provision, and therefore people married at a tender age, from the age 16, from the age 12, others even 13, there was already marriage. But because of economic and societal rules that have come in, but also deliberate policy that has come in, we also look at holy vis-a-vis secular, with the inborn of Christianity, with the inborn of religion, with the inborn of government policy. We realize there, even including economic constraints, we realize now that our marriage age is increasing. If we were to use the same example, ours would be from 22 rising to 27, because of these limitations that have come in. So in the past, also outside Christian Europe, marriage was also a holy issue, which I have just stated. So we want to look at the household trends. You see, I've been discussing the trends that are occurring and predominant today. But now we want to look at what is the problem with these trends, with the new trends, or we are trying to give you a picture. I want us to have a picture of what could be the possible problems that could arise as a result of these household union trends that are occurring today. What we should note is that these particular trends may not be manifested predominantly in Africa today because our societies are just getting it, they are what they call modernizing. But so because our societies are yet modernizing, apart from our urban areas, these particular trends may be very predominant in our urban areas, but not in our rural settings. So we want to understand what could be the problem that might arise as a result of these trends. So the family always has seemed to be on the decline and in disarray at any given moment as compared with the past. Today, you are realizing that the family is becoming a decline. Why? Because people are having single marriages. So, because family institutions and roles associated with them are central to all cultures, any change can seem threatening because it requires compensating changes in many interconnected cultural norms. You realize family is based on 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 our cultural norms. However, when you look at the trend, when you look at the changes that are occurring today, it becomes a threat because it means that there is going to be a cultural shift. It means that our interconnected cultural norms to family are deeply going to be affected because our cultural norms and values are therefore going to shift as a result of these shifting modern families. So, nevertheless, the four trends in most modern families that have received the most scrutiny are as followed. So let us look at the first one. It is what we call increased proportion of children living in single parent families. This is because of union dissolution and childbearing outside of unions. So we are realizing that there are a lot of children that are single, that are being raised by single parents. But also we are realizing this is coming out of one, either because of divorce, separation, or widowhood, or because people are bearing children out of unions. Now, what is the impact of this to our population? We shall look at it as we proceed. Another second trend that we're seeing today or change is an increase in the proportion of non-traditional living arrangements. Unlike our traditional knowledge that it is marriage, ours has shifted to non-traditional. Three is increased women's labor force participation across the life course. If you understand our traditional norms and roles of men and women, you realize in our traditional setting that women were less involved into feeding or looking for or providing for the family. Women were more or less into keeping and house chores and more of household related activities. But today we're seeing women more into life course, labor provision, and participation. The last trend or change that we're seeing is an increasing number of people living alone, especially at the older ages. So let us look at these changes one by one, and we realize that children in single parent families have few economic resources and represent one of the most rapidly growing groups living in poverty. So single parenthood is being associated with poverty. This is a large part because of the absence of second household income, but also because of the gender gap in pay that still penalizes women. And the vast majority of single parent households are still headed by women. So the family figure or the fatherly figure is often taken off from these families, and you realize that they struggle with the income. The second is more couples are living together in non traditional ways. Some segments of the population believe that traditional marital commitments, referred to as family values by proponents, are being undermined by increasing acceptance. So, in this modern setting, you're realizing there's increasing acceptance of cohabitation, divorce, and non traditional arrangements. And this is a delay in our family values. So, on the other hand, non marital cohabitation among young may reinforce the stability of marriage when it does occur. So, we're also trying to look at the other hand as an advantage that maybe if couples cohabit, it is going to greatly stabilize marriages. So it is trying to provide room for a trial marriage, and it's trying to delay marriage until people generally are less committed to marriage. So it may, we're also looking at maybe cohabitation as an advantage that it may, but nevertheless, we're saying that it delays family values. So, of course, we also try and say it may that non-traditional living arrangement may also provide social and economic stability for individuals who are legally barred from forming a traditional union. In this example, we are trying to put in gays and lesbian families. So, a traditional aspect would in Africa would bar these gay and lesbian families. However, because of the shifting marriage patterns, you're seeing that we're seeing these unwanted traditional cultures being starting to evolve. So more women are working for wages before marriage. After marriage, and as mothers of young children, some segments of the population view women working outside the home as the root of marriage decline. So many of the people today associate the fact that women started looking for employable opportunities or jobs, or started working away from their home as the true root for the decline of marriage, or as the true root for marriage declining. So it is actually true according to research that possibly the fact that women started working outside their home, it is a route for decline. Women's economic independence allows marriage to become more of a lifestyle choice than an economic necessity for women. So we realize traditionally that because women were not engaged in economic activities, they were more bent to the man because they saw the man as an economic necessity. However, the economic independence, therefore, has given them room so that they portray lifestyle, I mean marriage, as a lifestyle of choice. Working before marriage often increases the likelihood marriage will be delayed, and working during marriage provides economic resources, allowing women to exit marital unions if they choose to do so. So, female employment also reduces married women's traditional domestic roles and fertility levels. So, the woman will tell you definitely that if I conceive today, I may not be able to, it may affect my work. But also because the woman is working, she may not be able to do the traditional roles like digging or cleaning up the house or cooking for you. more people are now living alone. In fact, this trend mostly represents a positive development, especially for men, because when a man leaves a home and lives alone, there is a sense that they will typically develop. But we're seeing a different trend also in men and females, because a boy or a boy at a reproductive age, a girl at a reproductive age, sorry, living alone may necessitate that she has multiple sexual partners, may necessitate that they do not understand their sexual linkage. But also, more people living alone today is another trend that has seen a spark in sexually transmitted illnesses, but also has seen a trend in the increase of mental issues. But it has also seen a trend uh, in fatherless children. So we need to understand why these patterns are very clear. While they may be developmental, at the other hand, we've also seen their negative impact in regarding health. So elderly, often widowed adults now independently. So more people living independently, we're also looking at the elderly of union instability on child well-being, adult related supports that are important physical well-being. So sometimes maybe because your marriage or union is very stressful, sometimes when you disconnect yourself, it may become important for your mental well-being. So divorced individuals, particularly men, have a 30% greater risk of early mortality than the married. So this is a study. If you were to read in that reference that I have put there, Shaw et al., you will be able to understand that this study saw that men who were previously married, and if they divorced and did not remarry again, the chances that they may go or die earlier is by 30%. That they have 30% greater risk of dying earlier than when they are married. One, because of several issues that possibly the man may feel frustrated that the woman possibly has left because with either his children or wealth, or may feel so. There are a lot of mental issues that may come in, but also there may be a lot of issues regarding care, in that the man may become less carefree of himself in regarding issues of watching their sexual life, because when you're married, then you understand that your sexual market is limited, whereas when you're not, there are chances that you may misbehave and enter into different sexual relationships and thus develop different issues. So, in summary, marriage remains the most common form of stable sexual union in nearly the entire world, but it is experiencing great transformation in many parts of the world. The general pattern of eventual spread of fast marriage through a birth cohort still appears nearly universal. Yet societies differ in terms of when the process starts. So this process of the first marriage or the age at marriage varies in different societies. So the proliferation of different unions forms, how fast it spreads once started, and how many never marry spreads across different societies. Rising ages at marriage, increasing proportions of people never married and living in non-traditional households, including cohabiting partners and single parents, are all becoming part of the landscape in many more developed regions. The relationship between these trends away from marriage and towards very low fertility levels is referred to as the second demographic transition. So all these patterns that are leading to lower people giving birth or low fertility rate is being seen by demographers as a second demographic transition, although there is considerable variety among the less developed regions. So some less developed regions, especially in Africa, are also beginning to experience signs of this transition. As a birth cohort matures, a birth cohort, we're talking about people that are born similarly in the same year or in a particular age group, its members start to experience different demographic events. So in that same cohort, you'll have members who are getting married, members who are divorced, members whose spouses have died. So that places them that place places them for periods of time in different marital statuses or sexual unions. So that entire age cohort may experience the people in that age cohort may be single, may be married, divorced, separated, may be cohabiting, may be in stable sexual unions, multiple unions. Society track changes in population composition with respect to stable sexual unions by means of census and interim sample surveys. So for us to understand our population composition, we try to use censuses and other data sets and sources of data that we discussed. That is why we ask in our data or in our research for your marital status. And these are the different types of marriage events or demographic events we use when we are trying to track marital status. So they sometimes track the transitional events by civil registration and retrospective surveys or census questions. So we were trying to say that when we're trying to understand the pattern of our marriage issues, we look at these sources of demographic data to try to analyze. And why we do it, it is because of those four major issues, which we called the changing pattern, but also uh, how they become a problem in the society. So just on the request of our colleague the other time, I came up with references here that at your own time you could go through these particular books and you'll be able to dive deeper into the concept of demography and health, and you'll be able to understand more how this uh, the demographics of your society are the major or are the biggest interplay in health, and you will be able to understand how you can develop prevention measures if you understand the demographics of your population. So from me to you, Samuel, that ends my submission for today, and those are just the reasons why but also for your time.